Joining me right now, GOP political strategist. It's Matt Mackowiak. Matt, good morning. How are you?
Morning, Chad. I'm doing great. How about you?
Doing wonderful. Thanks for joining us today. Before we get into the national headlines, which there are quite a few national headlines that we can talk about today, I want to ask you about a piece that came out yesterday, and it's with the Texas legislature. We're now in May, so things are really at a frantic pace. There was a piece that was released yesterday from the conservative group Empower Texans, and
yeah.
I don't know if you've seen it or not, but in my opinion, they took kind of a swing at the governor here, saying that Abbott is nothing like Rick Perry, where Rick Perry was involved quite a bit. You always saw Rick Perry. You're not seeing a lot of the governor. That his agenda isn't being as taken seriously as maybe Rick Perry's was in the past, and that if he doesn't get more involved, then his agenda overall will fail. And they even, I guess they went through and they found some off the record conservatives who said that there are some who say that maybe Abbott doesn't believe the conservative rhetoric that he espouses. What do you think? Is that a fair criticism or unfair criticism?
Yeah, I don't doubt his beliefs. I believe he's very, very conservative. Look, this has actually been, to be really candid about it, this has been bubbling up for some time. And, part of this is that the House and the Senate are very different. The Senate is much more conservative than the House is. That's just a fact. And the Senate moved, I think, all four of Governor Abbott's emergency items, I believe, before the House even appointed committees. That's never happened before. So the governor and the Senate have been really quite well aligned from the very beginning of the session. The House has really been kind of playing games with Abbott's priorities. They did move CPS reform, Child Protective Services reform early on, but they haven't taken up Convention of States yet. They just finally took up sanctuary cities with 32 days left, but they attempted to sort of water it down. Ultimately, a couple conservatives put an amendment in there that made it much more like the Senate bill, made it more conservative, and that vote did pass, but it only passed with 81 votes. But it was, a majority. Part of this is that the House has been mad at Abbott for some time, and I say that broadly speaking. They're mad going back to last session. They're mad about some of the primaries, how those played out. They believe the governor made sort of bigger promises as it related to ethics reform and pre-K in terms of providing cover to House members, and he didn't follow through with that. So there's been a bit of a battle going on between the House and the governor's office for some time. It also goes back to the state of the state. I think House members felt like the governor was kind of maybe too conservative or sort of sided too much with the Senate in the state of the address. So that sort of set this current session off maybe on the wrong foot, at least in terms of the House. Now, from my standpoint, I'm much more aligned with the Senate in terms of what could actually be done. And I think the governor's there, too. I think, look, a lot of this, Chad, goes back to just his background and his personality. He's fairly risk-averse. He has a judicial manner. He doesn't like, picking fights or, kind of dissension on the overall team. And, sometimes when you're governor, you got to be willing to make people mad. We're getting down to the last 4 weeks of this session, and I think we're getting to that point where he's going to have to start making people mad if he wants to get these big things done.
But is that who he is, though? I mean, you kind of you touched on it there. His personality is different than Rick Perry's personality, and yeah. The lieutenant governor, throughout history and in the state has been a more powerful, position. So, is this just what you get with Greg Abbott? Is somebody who's going to come up with the ideas? He's not going to threaten a special session unless it's something that is absolutely threatening for the state, that he's just going to throw the ideas out there, and hey, if the House isn't on board, he'll bring it back up again in the next session.
So this is really is if you make a threat, and I'm not saying that Abbott has, but if you make a threat, it has to be credible. And one of the very limited powers that governors of Texas have in our Constitution is to call a special session. Look, there is no one, perhaps lobbyists might be an exception, but there is no one that wants a special session. These members are already exhausted, and the worst month is ahead of them still. They want to get home to their families and their jobs. They want to take a summer vacation with their kids. And that's true for the governor's office, the Senate governor's office. It's true for people throughout the state government. The session is a very exhausting time, but as governor, you have basically three responsibilities. One is to appoint officials, both in your own cabinet, but also at these boards and commissions. Two is to sign or veto bills, and of course the veto period after the session ends is a very important time. And the third is to call a special session and set the call of the special session. What are the issues that can be considered? And so if Abbott started several weeks ago telling people really wasn't going to call a special session under any circumstances. Now I'm not convinced he did that, but if he did do that, then he's sort of limiting his own leverage, and that may be why the House has felt less pressure to respond to his emergency items and to kind of respond to the way the Senate has been moving things. So we'll see where this goes. Look, these sessions generally take on this kind of rhythm, right? They start off fairly quietly. There's a lot of activity. It's kind of quiet in the middle. Things start to break down. Things generally have to get worse before they get better, and I think we're getting to that point of the session. But everything has to fall apart, and they put it back together at the end.
Speaking of it has to get worse before it gets better, the repeal of Obamacare, It looks like the House maybe is going to try again this week. We've heard this before. We've seen the movie before. We know how it ends. What do you think that they can actually get something done this week?
Man, that's a great question, and it's very hard to know. I mean, I don't think they're at 216 yet, and that's the number they need to pass based on the number of vacancies that exist currently, with special sessions still scheduled in Montana and South Carolina, I forget where else. Georgia has a runoff. So, I mean, I think that they've been whipping that vote, around the clock. Obviously, the president has put pressure on them to do it. They really wanted to do it before the 100th day. They realized that wasn't possible. So I think the odds are likely there will be a vote this week, and my guess is it will pass. I don't think it'll pass with 216. I think it'll pass with at least 217, because no one wants to be able to be called the person that cast the deciding vote. That's a politically risky place for someone to be, perhaps. So I think ultimately they probably will get there, but I also think President Trump kind of confused things and complicated things over the weekend when he was on Face the Nation, and it was not entirely clear that he understands the specifics of the bill, particularly as it relates to pre-existing conditions, where he seems to maybe not fully understand it. Look, what matters here, Chad, is they've got to get something out of the House. They got to get something over to the Senate. Everyone knows whatever the House passes is going to change considerably in the Senate. They got to get that process started, and so that's what this is about. They've got to get a vehicle out of the House. I think that they're aligned well enough now that my guess is they will do that this week. But boy, it's going to be close and it's going to be hard.
Real quick before we let you go, it looks like there's been a budget deal that'll last through September. It doesn't defund. It does not defund Planned Parenthood. It doesn't fund a border wall. It's only half of, I think, what Trump wanted for defense. This isn't what Trump wanted in the budget, but this is just what we're going to get, right? I mean, this is kind of the first swing for Trump, and he didn't get nearly as much as he wanted, it seems.
Yeah, look, I mean, he did not get all he wants. I don't even think he got half. He got a little bit of what he wants. Now, keep in mind, this is the first budget year. You're already in the first budget year. The budget ends September 30th. So, I actually don't think on these spending issues he has a very strong hand, because you can't. It's going to be very hard to blame Democrats when you have the White House, the House, and the Senate. Now, I actually think the Democrats have not really negotiated in good faith, but that's just not a debate you're going to win with the public, and certainly not with the media the way it's been behaving. So I think they decided to sort of, live for another day. They know that they have to get this spending fight behind them. They know they have the debt ceiling coming up, which is going to be a very heavy lift and not be very pleasant. And they got to get on with those two things to healthcare and to tax reform. I mean, those are the big ticket items. This year will either be successful or not for the Trump administration based on whether they are able to be successful in healthcare and tax reform. Everything else is white noise, and it's sort of peripheral to those two core issues, and I think they're starting to realize that.
All right, Matt, tell folks where they can sign up for your newsletter and listen to your latest podcast as well.
Absolutely. We send out a morning email to Texans. We've got 4,000 Texans that receive it every day at mustreadtexas.com. It takes all the top news and opinion from around the state, puts it in one place, and delivers it to you usually by around 8 a.m. Monday through Friday. And, of course, my podcast is available with the Washington Times. You can check it out on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or online at onpolitics.com.
All right. As always, Matt, appreciate it, and we'll visit with you next week.
Thanks. Have a great week. Take care.
You too. It's Matt Mackowiak on the Chad Hasty Show.